Boink. Business in the front, party in the back. That's why this ride is called the Lyle Mullet, because you get all of your climbing out of the way in the first 18 miles of this ride if you ride it counterclockwise. And as an added bonus, it's only about 2,500 feet over that 18 miles, which compared to riding single track, that hardly feels like any climbing at all. You start this ride at the Lyle trailhead just off of State Route 14 in the adorable little town of Lyle, Washington. The real purpose of this ride is to do a full pull down the Klickitat Trail, but instead of riding as an out and back or shuttling to the top, we're going to approach it as a loop. So from the parking lot, ride out to the highway and take a left. Traffic on SR 14 really calms down quite a bit after the town of Lyle, as there are fewer tourist attractions along the highway between Lyle and the next major river crossing. I just think that you should keep this in mind, as the prospect of riding your bike on the shoulder of SR 14 may seem absolutely terrifying if you're used to driving any section of this highway between Washougal and Bingen. This section is very different. It's much quieter. From very near the beginning, this ride is already distinctive, and you haven't even left the pavement. Because not only do you get great views of the Columbia River taken at bicycle speed so you can really appreciate this scenery, but you also get to ride through tunnels, which means you get to turn on this fun little tunnel signal. I've driven by this signal like 5 times. This is the first time I've actually gotten to be one of the bikers who's making the lights flash. This isn't your typical dark and scary tunnel, but it is still fun. The sign over the tunnel says it was built in 1933, which is after the historic Columbia River Highway on the Oregon side was finished. Without bothering to look it up, I'm going to guess that the highway on the Oregon side wasn't allowed to be the only route through the gorge for very long, considering how many little communities there are along the Washington side of the gorge. I'm not a huge fan of riding on pavement, but the views of the river here between Hood River and the Dalles, they're gorgeous. So if this highway portion of the ride is the deal breaker for you, I'd urge you to reconsider, as in this case, it did not detract from the experience one bit. This was just another nice part of the ride. It just happened to be on tarmac. There's a nice pit stop in Murdoch, where there's a gas station and convenience store. This is the last services you'll have access to until the town of Klickitat, 26 miles from here. So if you need some Cheez-Its, jerky, or Gatorade, this is the place to stock up. From the town of Murdoch, it's another mile past the junction with Highway 97 to the intersection with Dalles Mountain Road, which is clearly marked with this brown sign leading to Columbia Hills State Park. Stay on Dalles Mountain Road when you see this intersection with Oak Creek Road. Don't go down Oak Creek Road. Right after this intersection, the road turns into loose gravel, and right here is where I instantly regretted fitting my bike with the 42C gravel tires instead of my 3-inch mid-fat tires before this ride. As far as I'm concerned, I think 42C should be considered a road tire. I don't know whose cruel joke it was to suggest that such a thing is a gravel tire. All they do is sink into this stuff, when what you really want on most unsealed surfaces is flotation. These 42C tires that I couldn't air down turned into a huge problem for me on this ride. More on that later. The Dalles Mountain Road turned out to be what felt to me like a relatively gradual climb that started out in some very scenic lava fields. These are eroded remnants of the large igneous provinces that wreaked climate havoc on planet Earth a few million years ago when they were oozing out of cracks in the crust. Cars are frequent along this road between the highway and the trailheads the hikers use, but the cars were all driving at a reasonable speed and mostly respectful the day we were riding this. Typically, drivers in the Northwest are docile and well-trained when it comes to sharing the road with bicycles. This part of the ride basically climbs up from the river to the Columbia Plateau, through ranches and grassland as you ascend. This scenery is quite a departure from the west side of the Cascades and kind of represents a continuous ecosystem from here all the way out to the western front of the Rocky Mountains. This is what the majority of the landscape of Oregon and Washington actually looks like, whether or not the rest of the world is aware of that fact. Resist the temptation to ride up to the left here at this wagon road and stay on Dalles Mountain Road. Do stop to take pictures though. I mean, I'm just assuming the landowners are okay with folks taking pictures. I don't know. This is private land, though, so be respectful. People do, in fact, make their living off of the natural resources up here. More on that later as well. As soon as you get past the state park, the road surface becomes less frequently maintained hardpack, which it's way better for so-called gravel tires that are just too skinny for real riding than the previous loose gravel of the more frequently traveled part of the road. As you ascend, you start to get great views of Mount Hood and Mount Jefferson if you look carefully. The nice thing about this area is that without all the trees around, there are expansive views of the landscape of central Washington and central Oregon. The next 4 miles also represents the steepest part of the ride, gaining about 1,000 feet as the surface of the road gets progressively rockier and more rutted out. This is clearly the part of the road that is not maintained for daily use or tourist travel. Eventually, you'll see this intersection to the left near this microwave station. This is a great place to eat lunch and additionally represents the high point of this ride. High point meaning elevation. There's plenty of other high points, just this is the highest elevation on the ride. Get it? Cool. From here, there are expansive views of the other side. By other side, I mean just the east side. The east side of Mount Adams, Mount Rainier, Goat Rocks, and Mount Hood. It's a nice place to just hang out and enjoy what you're seeing. BS and make sure that you're getting enough to eat because you definitely want to make sure you don't leave yourself in a calorie-restricted state. This is going to be a long ride. You're only 18 miles in, although you have gotten all the climbing out of the way. This is the last of any significant climbing. From here, the party starts. The very, very long, gradual party. Well, okay, it's not all that gradual to start with. I was definitely on the wrong tires for this section. This 900 feet of descent over about a mile is only a road in the most technical, general sense of what one would consider a road. It's as wide as a road would be anyway. This is a road in scare quotes. What actually made it a pretty decent mountain bike descent was the fact that it's so chewed up and rutted. I mean, you don't want to go off either side of these ruts, or these, not ruts, the tire tracks on the sides of the ruts, but it's chunky, rutted, and really steep. The views while descending this road are jaw-dropping. It's beautiful. I mean, you won't get to look at the view all that much because you'll be too busy watching the ground underneath you, but there it is. So there's that. I would hate to be up here, though. I would hate to be up here when this red clay is wet, because I'll betcha this is the kind of mud that just sticks to everything. After that super chunky, not gravel bike at all descent, you'll end up at this intersection with a paved road, the Centerville Highway. Take a left on the Centerville Highway and ride for less than half a mile until you get to this intersection with Harms Road, and take a right. After less than a mile on Harms Road, you'll come to the trailhead for the top of the Klickitat Trail. This isn't quite the top of the trail, actually, but it's close enough. And there's a nice parking area here, and this is the part everyone treats like the top of the trail. The actual grade for the original Klickitat rail line, it goes all the way up to Goldendale. The Klickitat Trail was originally designed, mostly was put there to get logs in and out, but then the mills closed down, so it got transferred over to public ownership in the early 90s. This fetid stream you're looking at is not the Klickitat River. It is a tributary called Swale Creek. So the canyon that you're starting out in is actually the Swale Creek Canyon. You may observe that there is a gate here at the top of the trail right before this converted rail bridge. You'll see quite a few gates like this. That's because this trail does cross actual working pasture land. The gates are there to prevent cows or sheep, whatever livestock is there. They're there to prevent livestock from being where they're not supposed to be. I've been told that it is a pain to chase down livestock who are on the run. This is people's economic livelihoods we're talking about here, so be courteous and shut the gates as you pass through. How would you feel if your neighbor opened your gate and your dog just went and was running around the neighborhood? Yeah? There you go. If you were hoping that the rail bed, which is strewn with baby head-sized rocks everywhere, would somehow smooth out as you descended the grade, you can go ahead and abandon all hope for that now. It does not get any better. It doesn't. It literally does not get better from here. It is not going to get any rougher or smoother. It's just going to be this bad. This entire trail is an unimproved, unpaved rail grade without tracks on it from top to bottom. But it's pretty in here. It's gorgeous. And here it's worth it. I mean, this is a unique landscape, and it's pretty. We had a lot of opportunities to stop and get nice pictures along Swale Creek as we descended. Don't forget to take pictures. We even saw a baby gopher snake. The canyon grows steadily deeper and steeper as the trail grade descends along the creek, and the trail gets more and more interesting along the way. You're basically just following a water course as it drains away off the Columbia Plateau here. It's fun to contemplate how this bench was dynamited into the lava rock all the way back in 1902 when they built this original rail line. All of the original rail bridges are also still intact on this grade, and they've thoughtfully added decking to each one. This is a far cry from riding across the cross members as was required in the recent past. As relaxing as it may sound to simply coast down an old rail grade for 25 miles, if you're on the wrong tires like I was, the gradualness of the grade actually makes it a living hell. It's just downhill enough that you can't stand up to pedal in order to get off the seat, and even if you did, you'd be going too fast for the surface, so you're sort of forced to sit down, and the shallow grade gives every single rock an ample opportunity to really just hammer on your wrists and lower back. Furthermore, there are a lot of sections of very loose gravel like this that just sucked my wheels down an inch or two, while the folks on bigger tires who'd aired down just floated right over it. Keep all of this in mind while selecting which tires you'll use for this ride. Some places along this Swale Creek section will even feel downright like single track, with real single track-like obstacles. These are just a preview of things to come. I mean, just look at some of this. There's places where springs erupt into the middle of the tread and it gets kind of muddy. This area is definitely rugged. My guess is that over time it will become more rugged, not less, as it is allowed to devolve more and more into a trail as opposed to a former rail line. The canyon does get prettier and wetter as you descend. The hillsides above become increasingly dominated by ponderosa pine and these adorable little kind of scrub oak forests that are indicative of sort of the central Washington and central Oregon gorge area. It's worth mentioning here that the Swale Creek section of this trail is closed during the fire season. So that's approximately July 1st through October 1st, sort of weather depending. But keep that in mind, and when you see this forest and how dry it can even be in early spring, which is when we're riding it in this video, right before it starts greening up, I mean, it makes sense. This place could be a pretty terrible fire trap in the wrong time of year. Descending further, you will start to encounter evidence of the landowners who live up here in the canyon. It took a lot of legal wrangling for this section of the trail to be officially open to the public, and it happened over landowner opposition, with some of the landowners in here even resorting to open intimidation and threats toward public users before there was an agreement reached. I haven't heard of any violence, at least not recently. But stay on the trail here and don't trespass on these people's property. Once you get past the landowners who would prefer to be left alone, you'll pop out on the bottom of Swale Creek, kind of near where it intersects with the Klickitat River. The trail here no longer has a bridge crossing the river, so you'll need to proceed left at this intersection, crossing the Klickitat River on the road bridge, and then turning left. This is the second of only 2 paved road sections on this ride. As far as paved roads go, this is quite nice. Nothing to complain about. The shoulder's a little narrow, but otherwise nothing to complain about. Obviously, I'd rather not ride on any pavement, but we take what we can get. You'll be on this road for about 2 miles until you get to the eponymous town of Klickitat. It's a pretty little town. I like it. You can stop here and you can take a picture next to this train car. There's a general store and some restaurants in town. Obviously, we didn't eat at any restaurants due to COVID restrictions this year, but hopefully in a few months, that will no longer be an issue. On this trip, we stopped at the local convenience store. This really does appear the most perfect location on the route. Fortunately, it is still all downhill from the town of Klickitat, which is a very long and skinny town. Very, very linear, this town. Almost like it's built between a railroad and a river in a tight canyon or something. And from the town of Klickitat, it's 12 miles of wrist-hammering, bruising single track all the way back to the car. The canyon walls are steeper, and there's a little more moisture in the canyon from here forward, so the rail grade has eroded into single track a lot faster than has happened on the rest of the rail line. The trail is far from neglected in here, however, as there are a series of well-maintained bridges like these leading over wetter sections of the trail. Even though you won't be far from the highway for the rest of this ride, these benches over the river are they're pleasant. It's a nice place to just kind of hang around and just be next to the river. You're listening to the river. You can feel the moisture from it. I mentioned it becomes more like single track in this section, right? Well, here you go. This is proof. It's definitely single track. And if I didn't already have a lot of experience mountain biking, I would have been miserable through here. If I'd been on more voluminous tires, I wouldn't have even noticed this. It wouldn't have bothered me. And if I'd only encountered the occasional rocky section on these so-called gravel tires, it wouldn't have seemed so bad either, but 12 miles of this was torture. Luckily, my bike is a carbon hardtail, and therefore it had a suspension fork. Had I not been equipped with that fork, I don't think I'd be able to even be typing this review on my computer the day after the ride like I'm doing right now. But being ill-equipped aside, the fact that this has been allowed to revert to a pathway and become a bit more textured seems like a feature, not a bug, right? It makes this trail more worthwhile. It's more of a trail than it would otherwise seem to be. This is pretty. This is a fantastic place to spend an early spring or fall day on any bike with a sufficient amount of rubber on it. Do not let my tooth-rattling experience color your views of this. You're missing out if you haven't had a chance to ride or hike this trail. A couple miles up from the Lyle trailhead, you'll come across this magnificent bridge spanning the confluence of the Klickitat River and Silvis Creek. Silvis Creek. We'll just say Silvis. On the map, this is called Mudspring Canyon, and if you peer over the bridge railing, you can see that the entirety of the Klickitat River just kind of wedges itself into that narrow slot canyon that doesn't really look to be much more than 10 feet wide at its narrowest. I kind of wonder how deep it is down there. Either way, it's pretty cool, and it's awesome that they built this bridge. This is not an insignificant bridge, and here it is. They built it here. It's no small thing, and it sure provides a neat view into the canyon. It's a great piece of infrastructure. So I think the people of Lyle and Klickitat, whoever got together to get this bridge put in, they should be very proud of themselves for this. After the canyon crossing, the trail just coasts for another couple of miles while nothing particularly interesting or eventful happens before it dumps you back in the parking lot in Lyle, where we started 48 miles and 2,500 feet ago. This was non-trivial. I recommend this ride so long as you have tires that are at least 2 inches wide. And yes, I would do this ride again. I'd like to take this moment to thank my Patreon supporters, especially my I have 2 now, Loamy Goodness level sponsors, Randy Relithford and Damon Corey, as well as my awesome Hero Dirt level sponsors, of whom I've added another one, Pedro Cantarini, and Heather Van Valkenburg, Jason Moore, Ty Morgan Marbett, and Todd McCarthy, as well as all of you other Patreon supporters out there. If you'd like to support what I do, navigate to patreon.com/voiceovertrails and choose a tier of support that seems right for you. And you too can help ensure that I can continue to afford to drive around and make these reviews. And most importantly, get out there and go ride your bike.